Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to welcome you to the Thrill of the Chase. This afternoon, I'm joined by three extraordinary voices whose work helps shape culture far beyond New York. They each move fluidly across disciplines, curating, designing, advising, and storytelling. They're cultural omnivores in the best sense, which aligns beautifully with TEFAF's ethos of celebrating over 7,000 years of art, from ancient objects to contemporary design. Jeannie Greenberg Rohatyn, founder of Salon 94, is a major force in the art world with her gallery based in a Beaux-Arts townhouse on the Upper East Side. Since founding the gallery in 2002, art and design have been intertwined in its program. The last 2 years, Jeannie has just had an exemplary program that has just drawn everyone to the Upper East Side. It's just been amazing, just show after show. It's amazing. Next is Adam Charlap Hyman, who is co-founder of the architecture and design firm Charlap Hyman and Herrero. And he brings a broad aesthetic vision to his practice. His work spans interiors, furniture, architecture, scenography for gallery shows, as well as operas. He curates exhibitions, designs textiles, furniture, furnishings. What doesn't he do? He has broad scope, and we shall explore that. And then next to him is Alexandra Cunningham Cameron, Curator of Contemporary Design at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. She began her career in literature, earning a master's degree before shifting to storytelling through objects. She is known for her narrative approach to design, which explores symbolism, inclusion, and cultural memory. So I think it's good to kind of begin about how we each started our journey into telling stories through objects. So I think one thing that links everybody is that there's a real familial link, that everyone kind of grew up in different ways with art and design in your life. So Jeannie, if you could kind of begin.
Absolutely. So I grew up with an art dealing father, and my mother wrote about art. And we grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, where the museum, of course, is filled with wonderful objects and art. And our house was a house built during the World's Fair by an architect named Leyenberger Davis. And it was this kind of wonderful Gothic architecture. And my father had built white walls with the architecture students at Washington University so that he could hang contemporary art there. And he was a dealer of the 70s, so he actually didn't believe in objects at all. He only believed in Donald Judd and a very pure kind of space to live in. So throughout kind of my young adult life, I would fall in love with objects and bring them home and kind of gently put them down on a table. And so I actually filled their house up for many, many years with objects that I desired.
Wonderful. Okay, Alexandra?
Gosh, I think I grew up sort of like with a high-low, with an incredible public art program in Miami in the 80s. Noguchi at Bayfront Park, think Christo and Jean-Claude Surrounded Islands, in Biscayne Bay, Philip Johnson's Cultural Center that had the library, and Miami Art Museum, and then garage sales, really. I really learned to like touch objects, look at things, sort of like pick what I liked by going and just seeing an array of things laid out on the floor. And from a storytelling angle, I was really obsessed with literature, and through reading and writing, I began to understand that beyond my own experience, objects carry memories and meaning, and I studied literature and then eventually realized that I wanted to sort of move outside of the page, move outside of the sort of critical realm, and start working with architects and designers and artists to make things that were maybe putting that meaning back into the world.
One quick question is, like in Florida, it seems like the thrifting would have been very special, like with a lot of people retiring there, that it would be stuff from like all over the world.
Yeah, that's very smart. I mean, maybe like 20 Burberry coats, from snowbirds who retired in Miami, and furs. And I used to go with my grandmother to thrift stores and shop, buy like ridiculous ball gowns and Bob Mackie and all of these things, and then go to in the North Miami Beach, in North Beach, there are all of these 50s style motels, many of which are being overdeveloped, that were kind of like the Las Vegas Strip, and they were called the Sahara and the Thunderbird and, many sort of culturally inappropriate or insensitive names, but they had root beer floats and pool culture and grilled cheese, and I would wear these ball gowns as like a 10-year-old these places, and really just sort of live my best life. So yes, the vintage shopping, thrift shopping, at that time, dealers were also design dealers driving giant trucks down to South Florida and then filling them up on the way back to New York, to sell things at the flea market. Or there weren't many galleries at that time.
Cool. And Adam, like art design is quite in your blood as well.
Yeah, I grew up with in a pretty creative household, musical and visual, and my mom was always painting and has a studio practice, and my dad is a toy designer actually. So we were always kind of building things, and I knew that I wanted to do something with architecture or design since a very young age, and was always kind of watching a children's movie, but because it had a nice house in it or something like that. So it was very kind of natural that I would wind up going to design school. It was something that I talked about from a very, very beginning, I guess. And then when I went to college, I met my now architecture partner in design school. So he was in the architecture program, and I was in the furniture program at RISD in Providence. And we didn't know each other well, but we admired each other's work from afar, I would say. And he is a very talented photographer as well as an architect and designer. And he was sort of making had kind of a side gig of photographing people's portfolios. So I had him photograph my apartment, which I had made as a project, and that's really how we got to know each other. Is he came up with this great idea to photograph the apartment at all different times of day with different cameras, and to capture it as if somebody had lived there for decades. And it was a very theatrical and funny thought, and we did it, and we wound up with this album of this sort of life of this apartment that actually I'd only lived in for 8 months of my senior year. And then we graduated, went our separate ways, and then kind of found each other again, working together on a project that just coincidentally we were both involved with, and kind of started from there.
Cool. And Jeannie, when did you realize, like, oh, I'm not just carrying the torch, but this is my passion? I've got,
Well, early. I knew that I was incapable of doing anything else. I actually thought I was going to be an academic. I went on to, after college, to the Institute of Fine Arts. But I also was really drawn to making my own money because I was already collecting, and I always had a job in order to buy art. So I, very early on. But also my father would take me to the Basel Art Fair. I would go and see Byler when he was an art dealer, and sit in his office, and long after a Cezanne Bathers painting. So it was pretty early.
Wonderful. And Alexandra, are you glad that you took a non-traditional path? Then you studied literature?
Well, it's too late now.
No, but I mean, do you think that it benefits you in work today that you kind of look at objects in a different way, maybe than people who like really studied design and stuff?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think continue to be an intuitive person, and I believe in following your gut. And at some point, I think I would have liked to have gone back to school. I still want to go back to school. I would love to sit in class and have directed conversations about historical texts and critical topics related to design and architecture. But I love to work, and I work all the time, and have found my way through design history by making projects, really, and learning from designers and historians, and in the beginning of my career, design dealers. I mean, being in the store rooms and the galleries of the best design dealers in the world, when I worked for Design Miami, taught me so much about design. Being on the vetting committee and unscrewing, a Prouvé chair from the 50s to understand all of the parts that assemble it, taught me an incredible amount of design. And in institutions, that sort of tactile experience is not as forthcoming, right? And so, yeah, I think your life is what you make of it, and there's no looking back. But I still kind of go where I feel I need to go.
Okay, wonderful. And this is fresh on my mind, Adam, because I saw a show that you curated yesterday that's up now. It's called Glass Subjects at R & Company on White Street in Tribeca. And it's an homage to Serge Roche. And it spans, the objects span a 1700 Baroque memento mori tabernacle that goes on to a 1989 Nicola L. Chaise shaped like a foot. And I think that just really shows the scope and humor that is in a lot of your work. And there's also a drawing from your mother that is of a monkey with its arm detached that's reflected onto a post. So, yeah. I mean, it's just, I think it's hard to find a through line in your work. And when I was looking at it, it seems like there is humor and there's like very deep research and just like intense scope in this. But I mean, like the foot and the tabernacle, which you need to see the tabernacle, is like these terrifying skeletons that are like melting, and like you can look between it, and like you can't just help about thinking about your own death when you look into it. So if you could talk about, coming up with this idea for this show.
Yeah, the show was, a lot of the shows that I've curated have kind of taken shape around the idea of an homage to a specific person, whether in the case of the show that we were talking about earlier at Tina Kim Gallery, it was someone I knew, or in this case, it was someone that I've just read a lot about, and in this case, it's Serge Roche, and he had a mirror gallery in the 20s and the 30s in Paris, and it was a destination for a sort of group of collectors of surrealism and a sort of certain group of people interested in decorative art. So he showed Giacometti mirrors, plaster, beautiful framed mirrors alongside 18th century mirrors, alongside Roman mirrors, and he was obsessed with reflectivity and mirrors, and he made his own mirrored objects that were called glass subjects. That's what he called them. And so I always loved this idea of this mirror gallery. He had the mirror gallery concept for him had come from his having found and come into possession of one of the last remaining silver chairs that had come from the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. That whole Hall of Mirrors had been filled with silvered furniture, silver-plated furniture, really extraordinarily. If you sort of can imagine then the degree of sort of glistening reflectivity in that room, it had been melted down essentially to finance the American Revolution, and so there's almost none of it left. But he had one chair, and that was sort of the foundation of his collection. So our idea for art was to kind of have a little connection to him in the way of a few objects that passed through his hands, or sort of connect to his story in an interesting way, and to create a mirror gallery of our own there. So they have a very long space. Their gallery is long, and it has this row of columns. So yeah, that was the idea. And it's sort of an ever giving subject, mirrors and reflectivity. There are probably an infinite number of shows that could be curated about it, but ours focused on the kind of surrealistic aspect of mirrors, the sort of worlds within mirrors, and people that are interested in mirrors as sort of portals.
Oh my gosh, art dealers hate mirrors. We're like, we walk into a house, we're like, take down that mirror and put up a painting.
Yeah.
So, but no, now I like mirrors because I'm working with designers and they're making mirrors.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm like, but I'll put them up now.
We were able to include some fine artists that are working with mirrors in really interesting ways. Like we have a photograph, self-portrait of Paul Sepulveda's, where he's photographed himself in a mirror, but you can't see him because he's taped a picture of himself over where the camera would be reflected. There was some fun.
Yeah, Pistoletto makes great mirrors.
I liked your Nikki de Saint-Phalle mirrors.
Oh my God.
Well,
yeah.
but she as well lived in a mirrored house, of all cracked, mosaiced mirrors, and she had a lot of anxieties and issues. She did laughing therapies and things, and I'm thinking, well, it's because you lived in this mirrored environment, which drove you crazy. But yes.
And Jeannie, now that you've done this, how has your, philosophy evolved from putting on shows for so many years? Have you, since the very beginning, have you learned a lot, and is it different?
I mean, each one is really about precision and about placement. I really do believe that art needs a lot of help, and it's helped by placement, and it's helped by careful hanging and lighting, and even if it's a dark room, that's part of the atmosphere. So I'm really interested in that. So every show I do, I start all over again. I think of it, as a fresh show. And but so I just continue. I hope I get better and better at it as I get older.
Cool. Do you pay attention to? Do you think that you're affected by what else is being shown, like in the art world?
Oh yes, I'm always always influenced by different museum exhibitions. I could be influenced by a garden, by a house that I'm at. It's there's so much to pick up on. It could be a meal that I've eaten that's impeccably, presented, or not. So yes, I'm very influenced. I think if you haven't seen the Jack Whitten show at MoMA, that's an incredible exhibition where you see an artist who just did so much expansive work and experimented throughout his career. And the curators there did an installation where they figured out a way to input all of the drawings and the notebooks, and it's just an incredible exhibition that is very, very different than their normal exhibitions. So I'm always thinking, and we're always trying to switch up pedestals. I have the Kennedy Yanko show up right now. She's famously makes her own pedestals, which I didn't like. And so I made the whole space into a pedestal as a result of not wanting to take her pedestals, which she knows.
Cool. And Alexandra, one of the biggest exhibitions you helmed when you first came to Cooper Hewitt, I think, was the Willie Smith exhibit. I think still that there is. I timed that perfectly. That there's still, pushback for looking at fashion in a deeper way from institutions that don't look at it as much from art people. It's been years and years and years, and still we have that can you talk about, how you wanted to bring this to the public?
Yeah, well, fashion, like jewelry, I think is an entry point for many people to craft and to art and joie de vivre. And Willie Smith in particular was someone who saw fashion as a bridge to art. He famously made the first edition of artist t-shirts with artists like Barbara Kruger and Jenny Holzer and Armand and Keith Haring as a means of trying to make art accessible through fashion. And when I learned about Willie Smith, I was incredibly inspired by the collaborative nature of his practice, working with architects and designers and visual artists, as I mentioned, but also performing artists. And he was someone who was creating a movement. And so a lot of my work relates to multidisciplinarity and creative communities and how they feed into each other. And design is a thread through all of that, right? Artist design, performing artist design, architects design, product designers design, and Willie's career, beyond being an insanely talented designer himself, he was someone who, as a kid, everyone knew immediately that there was something very special in how he illustrated, how he drew, his dedication. But he was also able, with his partner Laurie Mallet, to create a new vision of fashion in the 70s and into the 80s that was incredibly inclusive, and made a party, made an event out of it. His exhibition, his runway shows were some of the first to bring in, custom commissioned musical scores, and Namjoon Paik did the scenography for, a 1984 show, and he had Whitney Houston on the runway, and it was an event that celebrated racial inclusivity, gender inclusivity. The clothing was gender nonconforming, and I was just totally inspired by him. I mean, that's kind of how exhibitions start, right? Like Adam, you're saying, you find someone whose story you're obsessed with, and Jeannie, you find an artist that you connect with, and you know that they can change the world in some way, and so you try to find a way to be the facilitator of that message.
Right, and just for those who don't know, Willie Smith was a Black fashion designer who died of AIDS, I think in 89?
87.
87, and he really did just so many art collaborations before anyone did, and he's glaringly not in the Black Dandy show, and it seems like...
I noticed that last night.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
I was hoping to do another round to just fact check that, but maybe.
Okay, yeah, there we go,
You
Mr.
did it.
Fact Checker. Yeah. So, and one more show I want to talk about is the Camille Herrero show, which was the talk of the town at Hauser and Wirth and was amazing. And besides all the wonderful sculptures that she did of these kind of elongated creatures and dogs, was the scenography that Adam did, and it's kind of mint green tennis court material or something that was just this magical immersive space and just super heightened the show. And where did that come from? How did your relationship with her start? I would just love to know more about this.
Yeah, well, we were introduced by friends, so it was really just a casual kind of friendship. But then we connected a lot over our love of trompe l'oeil and kind of different scenographic techniques and kind of these odd corners of interior design history, and she asked me to help with the scenography and curation of a show that she was putting together in Germany, and that was the first of what's now been five shows that we've done with her. And so this was the first in New York, and we were trying to find a way to channel the feeling of being a child amongst giant objects that seem abstract to you, and so we found this material that's a sort of recycled rubber that might be found on a playground or a gym or something like that, and had that rolled out through the entire gallery, so the floor was soft, and then we created these kind of forced perspective lines on it that condense as you go farther back into the show, so that things seem farther away than they are, and there's sort of this distortion of your experience of the space, which is further confused by these objects that are, in some cases, truly enormous. Yeah, I mean, it's just such a, it's so fun to work with an artist on creating a kind of space for them to show this work. You know, my part of that project took maybe 7 or 8 months, but she had been working on those sculptures for many years. So, you know, has this whole arc of thought and a whole kind of philosophical, spiritual, intellectual journey going on with her practice. And I come in right at the end and sort of try to find some way to pull out what a room can look like from this train of thought. And it's very, very cool to have that kind of dialogue and to work on such a space with somebody that's so creative. So it was very cool and fun to see such a kind of enormous something of such an enormous scale come to life. So yeah, but she's an amazing thinker and has a wonderful sensibility around materials and space and the way we perceive things that are flat or have dimension. And for a designer or an architect, it's quite a fun language to engage with. She's sort of giving you a lot in terms of like a spatial and design way of thinking. So yeah.
Did you do the glove on the floor, or was that her?
Like put it there?
Yeah.
Yeah, we worked with her to figure out where things would go.
Okay.
You know,
Very Adam move.
Yeah.
Okay, if people don't know, if you went to the show, it was all these very intricate, you know, paintings and sculptures, and then just this workman's glove just incongruously in the middle of the floor where you walk, and a guard had to stand there and be like, "Don't walk around it."
yeah, it was sort of.
And it was like a performance art element, and it was really strange. And the poor guard all day on a Saturday had to just stand there guarding just a glove on the floor.
Yeah, a bronze glove. It was
very
actually.
surreal.
Oh, I thought it was just a leather
Very
glove.
surrealist, you know.
It was
So-
lifted out of sort of a show that we did with her, a group show we did, and we had that glove in this group show, and it was the same thing where people kept sort of like almost tripping over it, like someone had to be pointing out this, and it just looks like something got discarded on the floor. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Sorry, my glove made me lose my train of thought now. So it was just announced that the Cooper Hewitt acquired the Tobias Wong, a great collection of Tobias Wong. And so tell me about, you know, like that, and just also just acquiring for the permanent collection. You know, as you came, you know, you worked at Design Miami for a long time, and there's a much, you know, what is it, the difference between saying like, okay, this is an amazing design object, but there's something else that we need to bring it into this permanent collection. It says more.
Right. Well, it's an incredible honor and a big responsibility also to acquire work for a Smithsonian collection and to think about, you know, how to mark important movements and practices and design history. But all of the curators spend a lot of time looking at the collection and also developing strategies and having conversations around what's missing and how we can build on what we have. All institutional collections have pretty organized plans that look at the strengths and look at the vision and the direction. So it's definitely a collaborative effort. My strategy is to see as much as possible. And I'm the curator of contemporary design, so I really look at kind of like the mid-70s until today. And I think most people expect that I focus on the 21st century, but something that I've noticed in our collection is that we need more work by artists in the 70s and the 80s that contextualize what's happening now and in the 90s. And that's part of how the conversation around Tobias Wong came to be. He was primarily practicing for a critical period, 2000 to 2010, making critical design work in the United States. So he is making objects and collaborations against fashion brands and sometimes with fashion brands. He took a satirical approach to designing objects. He was commenting on society. So he wasn't interested just in utility. He came out of the Cooper Union's art school at a time when Hans Haacke was running the school. So he already had a critical institutional practice as part of his education. And from my perspective, he was someone who really defined the sort of American critical design practice during that period, which was so influential in Europe in the 90s and into the 21st century. And in order to look at the work that's coming out of RISD and coming out of other American design schools, you need to sort of have this lineage, from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s. And so I think a lot about that thread in terms of the acquisitions that I propose. And then, of course, we have another layer of acquisition committee, which Adam has joined. And there are many, many people involved in thinking through, how to represent a history of design. And of course, in Cooper Hewitt's case, it's also a global history of design because our collection started as an international design collection for the Cooper Union, study collection for young designers. It's wonderful, honestly. And it's thrilling, talk about the thrill of the chase, to identify a designer's work or an artist's work or an object, and to be able to work to bring that to a place that is going to care for it and share it with the world and protect it in perpetuity, write about it, think about it. And I think many cultures express their value through what they save, and I really think about that as I'm approaching objects. I think about how it's going to be thought of in 100 years and 200 years.
Cool.
Yeah.
And have you, Adam, since you've joined, can you tell me about any specific object that y'all have taken on?
Pippa Garner.
Yeah, the Pippa Garner cabinet. It was very exciting to see this cabinet by Pippa Garner, who's a really important artist and was not represented in the collection. I think there was one piece, or no, this was the first.
This is the first
piece, and on the collections committee, I mean, you just sort of you're in the position of listening to the curators tell you about why they believe this object should be part of this collection, and it's extremely inspiring and educational to be able to listen to people that are really, really scholarly and have thought so hard about what it could mean to develop an American design museum, or a collection that will be useful to students, or a collection that will be useful to a society. And it's in the case of the Pippa Garner cabinet, I think it was sort of a very interesting niche of sort of artist furniture and sort of this crossing of art and design, and the kind of blurring of different boundaries around the disciplines, but also gender and
What does this cabinet look like? If it's Pippa Gardner, it must be an extreme cabinet.
yeah, well, maybe you should describe it.
I mean, it's a very early work. So we were interested in bringing something of Pippa's into the collection, but we wanted a piece pre-1990. Let's see. So we wanted something quite early, and so we began looking for some years to try to locate a piece that really was an expression of her history as a designer and an engineer, and that also communicated a critical perspective on the world and gender experience. And this cabinet called Think Man is wonderful because it, is sort of constructed as a traditional cabinet on 4 legs with a light on the top, but it's in the shape of a blazer, and it opens. And it's actually an evolution of an earlier work that Pippa had made that was a blazer that hung in a cabinet. And many of us have seen images of Pippa on the talk show circuit wearing a sort of cut-off blazer. And so this idea of playing with concepts of masculinity, thinking of putting on a wardrobe, putting on a costume, presenting yourself to the world in a certain way, immortalizing that, concretizing that in traditional furniture-making materials like wood, was something that we thought was an incredibly rich storytelling object.
Cool. Okay. And we need in 5 minutes, we're going to open up the floor. Jeannie, one quick question is, since you founded the gallery in 2002, and design was always a part of it. I think in that moment, it wasn't like the hippest thing to combine art and design. So, were people like, what are you doing?
Yes, artists didn't like it. I had to finally get on the art fair committees in order to allow it in. I would sit in the art fair committee at Frieze and say, okay, every dealer has really bad furniture. I'm so sick of looking at crates and looking at IKEA furniture. Can we please just, allow people to show design in these art fairs? It would make it a much more pleasant experience. And so that, it's really that practical on just a level of enjoying these spaces. To have people kind of walking through to look at art as a big shopping mall, it should be a different experience. So I was always very conscious of that. I always curated tableaus and booths, and it was something that was interesting to me because I do feel that you have to up-level, you have to make these art experiences better than ordinary experiences. In order to stop somebody in their tracks, in order to stop somebody and let them slow down and think about art in a way. And oftentimes it's that wonderful object on the table or a thing of flowers or something else that can attract somebody in. So and as well, my first gallery was really in my home. So it was kind of considered a salon. I named it after Florine Stettheimer's Salon and Gertrude Stein's Salon. I was really interested in a seamless space where you could have a dialogue and sit down, and not an empty space, not a white box.
And did you live upstairs from the gallery portion of the house?
I did.
I want to ask you, were you ever like, I need a break from your family, and I'm just going to relax next to this sculpture and have some Jeannie time?
Oh my gosh, all the time. But my kids grew up, watching me in my office. My office is a very small office, and it's covered with books, and it's got a Hella Jungerius table, which I love, I covet, and it's just a little cave. And my kids would come home from school, and if they, they could either come in, but if I went like that, they rushed up the stairs. They knew that they couldn't come in and talk to me. Okay. So it was very clear. And yes.
Much better behaved than mine.
Oh, my kids are so scared of me. They still are.
Cool.
No.
Inspired by when
Adam, by the way, made a room with my daughter Coco Rohatyn, who was an ice skater, and I mean, you did the most. In fact, that Camille floor is like the floor that you did for my daughter.
That's true, yeah.
You came in and my daughter had been a skater, and all of a sudden you picked out a floor that looked like a skating rink floor, and they're very ugly, but you made them look so beautiful. It's so cool. But yes, anyway, go on.
No, I was just, I remember when, it's funny, your story about all the ugly furniture in the art fair. I remember with Andre, my architecture partner, sort of one of the main kind of impetus to start our firm was that we had all these amazing books about architecture firms that we loved and architects that were so brilliant, and then they just have really ugly or basic furniture and these amazing projects, some incredible concrete sculptural thing in Switzerland, and then just some random chair from Design Within Reach, nothing special. If we could just do rigorous architecture and put, compelling, interesting, beautiful pieces of furniture and objects and decorative art in that rigorous architecture, then maybe we would have something. And I remember going to your house and seeing the Raphael Vignoli space and the way that you had approached that, which was somehow not stylish. It was rigorous. It was very interesting how you did that, and I was very inspired by that.
I quote you actually a lot, something that you said a very long time ago that you probably don't remember, but I think you'll be happy that you said, because it was quite inspirational. I think it's quite true. You said, you don't need to worry so much about interiors as long as you put two good things together, they're going to look good together as long as they're good, no matter what period they're from, what colors they are. And I think that thinking like that emboldens people to also just make choices and be comfortable with those choices.
Cool. Awesome. I think now we're going to open up the floor if anyone has questions for these people who deal a lot with art and design in non-traditional spaces or very traditional spaces and home spaces. If anyone has questions. We have a microphone that shall be distributed.
I actually have two questions, if that's okay. My first question is for Alexandra. I also have a background in literature, and I'm just wondering if you have a favorite. I find an author that you go to when you want to just go into a world that is described in a way that you love.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I think it changes depending on my mood and my research. I'm in a Tom Wolfe mode because I need to be entertained. I have so much fun with Tom's sentence structure and the way he describes architecture and design. I want to put together a whole book club that's just around books that, fiction that creates an atmosphere around design in a way that's compelling.
Be in that club. It's totally up my alley. My second question, for everyone is, I see a lot in the past, 5, even maybe 7, 8 years of surrealism coming into the world of design, but I'm not seeing it as a movement, like the political movement that it was back in the 20s and 30s. So I'm wondering if you think that there is possibility for a communal sort of movement, or are we all too individualistic these days to really have that sort of just a community movement in the art world?
I mean, there are circular movements happening in design. There's so much sharing and conversations around, being careful about waste. I think when we're looking at, vintage shopping and trying to be conscious about our ecological impact, I find that to be a really compelling design movement that goes across fashion and art and architecture, furniture.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. The environment. I mean, we're working on a show with Martino Gamper,
Oh, yeah.
Max Lamb, Carl Friesch, and then we've added another layer, which is Gemma. I know we're doing all of the partners, Francis Up Richards, and what binds them together is actually thinking about the environment and recycling. You won't know it when you see the exhibition, but they're very conscious of it.
And I think that maybe it's not overtly politicized, but this kind of trend towards multidisciplinary practices within artists' practices. So many artist shows of the last few years have been these kind of very holistically considered spatial experiences. I think that in and of itself is actually a very kind of radical act and sort of pushing against certain boundaries that have been drawn and upheld for a long time. So, maybe something is happening even if it's not sort of in the form of some.
Yeah, I don't think it's a visual movement. I actually think it's more of a community-minded group of artists that gather together and share a dialogue. And actually, the art hopefully does look different and have different voices and practices, but yet inform each other by the dialogue versus visually. And by the way, read the new Yoko book, which is a really interesting book about, I'm only halfway through, but about how her life has informed the objects that she has made. For example, she, during the war in Japan, lived on a farm, and when she was 13, 14, and had to describe an apple to her brother because they were starving. And then she made this incredible apple sculpture that we all know that's the most exquisite sculpture, but it has this incredible story. Or she made a chess set that's all white, that you kind of conceptually have to play. But it's absolutely her life and her work and her, is all, it's all related. It's so beautiful.
Hi, thank you very much. It's very interesting to hear your stories. And I have a question. Could you explain a little bit more on what it means when you say the thrill of the chase? Like, what are you chasing exactly? And also, how do you go about discovering your artist? Does the vision come first and then you find the artist, or does it kind of create itself?
Oh, is the question for me? Oh, I didn't hear the question, to be honest, because I was expecting I swear if you could repeat the question louder.
I think part is for you. What do you mean by the thrill of the chase?
Oh.
And then for us, how are we thrilled? Maybe.
Oh, I thought it was just like that what united these three people were that it was really chasing narratives, and I think that it's very interesting that they're shaping culture in New York and in a greater sense, and like looking at objects and reading into them, and in a very interesting way, and also that they're all tied to traditional spaces such as homes, like the Cooper Hewitt is in the Carnegie Mansion, and that Jeannie's gallery is in a home, and that Adam does design for home, and he places art within homes, but he also does his own scenography and that kind of thing. So that's I think that there's like a lot of linkages that is hard to define all of them, and that they all kind of deal with just so many different categories of creativity.
This might be a silly question, but I'm curious. I'm listening to you talk about home, and obviously about objects and beauty and rarity and of objects. If each of you had to select one everyday, quotidian kind of object It could be a toaster oven or a white t-shirt. Something really humble and really simple. What would that object be?
To live with?
To live with,
To look at?
that makes your day, that brings you a joy. Something really simple.
I mean,
I'm just curious.
I mean, I think a lot of the objects that we work with do come from a very humble place. They're kind of elevated into ritual, and they become ritualized by use a lot of times. So for me, maybe starting with a chawan, just a simple teacup that you drink your tea from every day. I like to hold my, I have a number of different chawans. I like to hold them. I love the touch, the feel. I love to look at them. So that's kind of a humble object.
I was in Japan earlier this year, and I went basket crazy, but not like special, amazing Japanese baskets like from the tradition of like art baskets from Japan. Just really simple ones from restaurant supply stores. And I went to the restaurant supply district in Tokyo and managed to come back with like 4 suitcases of the most simple baskets that then I showed to a Japanese person in my office who said, "Oh yeah, you can get those actually like in like a market around here." Yeah. And now I know I can. And so they really are actually quite quotidian objects, but I've been using them around my house, and they're just delicate, and they're quite open. And the way that they're woven, it must take only a few minutes to make each one. But they're so beautiful, and something about the quickness and the aspect of the hand and the skill that's gone into them, even if it's simple, is just energizing. I just love it. It makes me so happy.
I've really been into fruit lately. Oranges and pretty soon peaches and I mean, when you started talking about Yoko and the apples, I thought of that. I love to just put them on the table, arrange them in a bowl. My kids are going through the phase of just like eating literally everything in sight, so they move quite quickly through the house. But they're multifunctional.
Good answer.
Do we have time for one more question? Yeah, the gentleman in the back.
Hi. So on the subject of the thrill of the chase,
I didn't name it. I'm just rolling with the punches, man. Okay, don't ask me about the
I'll
name
direct
anymore.
this question at Jeannie, I guess. But as someone who's collected objects from a very young age and someone who deals with rare objects, like you were talking about the silver chair from Versailles, have you ever had like a white whale object, a rare object that you've searched for across time and space? Do you seek out objects like that?
I mean, I've had an object that I saw very young that influenced me a lot that I was able to acquire later in my life, and that was a David Hammond's dung, an elephant dung, and it's got a chain around it. And very early on, I hadn't been exposed to David or to actually a lot of Black artists. And I saw it in the basement of Jack Tilton Gallery when I was young with my father. And it just struck me. It was just like a thunderbolt, this object. And later when I became a curator, I was able to work with David. And I always remember that object. And then he told me about how he had gone to the Bronx Zoo, and he had his girlfriend jump the fence and get the dung. And he thought a lot about the white elephants that the zoo would drag every year across the Brooklyn Bridge, and it kind of the enslaved elephant, as it were. And it really touched me. And then one day, not that long ago, actually, I was at a collector's home, and there it was. And of course, I ended up buying it. And now actually, it's an object that I think you've seen. It's in the Konstantin Griekic pedestal. It's the only object in my house that I have like a fancy pedestal for. That he made probably for Giacometti or something, and it's in there, and I can't believe I get to live with this. Amazing.
Got the plinth.
Yeah.
Get it?
Yeah, it's in my kitchen. No,
Okay.
it's not in my kitchen.
Does anyone else have your white whale that you got?
God, how to choose? You know, I mean, maybe connected to the question about like, where do we look for things, or how do we chase things or find things? I think it's more of like a lifestyle choice, like an orientation, you know, of being constantly curious and immersing and re-immersing yourself as much as possible in visual culture, the work of artists, work of writers and magazines, social media, exhibitions, like whatever you can put your hands on. And I think that that's maybe a characteristic or a drive or a choice or a disease, I don't know, it depends on sort of where you are with it, that many people who work in artistic fields share, you know, is this like drive to be exposed to new forms and ideas, and you just sort of seek them out as much as possible wherever you can, wherever you are in the world.
So it's a toaster oven.
You know, I have a toaster oven that I love so much.
Great. Okay, Adam?
Yeah, there's a designer, artist, Gabriella Crespi, who made these amazing furnitures and decorative art pieces and boxes and things. And she made this candlestick that was cast from a candlestick that that belonged to her parents, and it's a bronze candlestick that she cast in brass, and then she had attached these two shells to it like this, these huge shells that are to hold like nuts or something for a party. And so then you have the candle like this, and then these two shells that are welded somehow with these little things. And
Sounds quite phallic.
it is. It is a very odd object, and it took my breath away when I saw it in an old magazine, in an old Domus magazine. And then I saw it again in the 1970s. There's like a book called 1970s Interiors that came out a couple years ago. That's a really comprehensive, wonderful book. And it was in there on the chapter of Gabriella Crespi. And then it was on the cover of another design book recently. And it just, each time I've just thought, oh my gosh, you know, that is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And then I got a notification for Shell, which is something that I have on my auction app, and then it was there. It was Shell Candlestick, and it wasn't even listed as Gabriella Crespi, and I bought it. I just couldn't even believe it. It was just like the craziest thing, and it just wasn't even labeled or anything, and it was the one. It's the one in the photo. It just blew me away, and now I have it.
Wow.
I've been like looking at this candlestick thinking, how could I ever make an object as amazing as this? I don't think I ever will. And where is this thing for 10 years? And then, yeah, now I don't know what to do with it.
It's so surreal.
Yeah,
It
it
totally
is.
makes sense that you would do it, and it makes sense that you would do the Willie Smith show with your shopping, you know, in Miami and in Florida.
Cool. All right. Well, we are now over time. Thank you so much.